Hello and welcome to SimCast, the higher education simulation podcast. My name's Tony Jermy and I'm joined by my regular co-host, Lawrence Hill.
Hello everyone and welcome back to SimCast. I'm Lawrence Hill and I'm the HSC Director for Clinical Simulation and Skills in the School of Health Sciences at UEA Norwich.
You're still getting used to that.
Still can't get it out.
I don't have a title anymore, so I just have to go, I'm Tony. So
yeah,
there we are. Not that I'm bitter or anything about it. I'm not bitter. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not bitter at all. It's just weird.
Yeah,
still getting used to it.
It's a period of transition, but we're getting there.
Anyway, today what we thought we would talk about is debriefing disasters or derailing the debrief.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some common pitfalls, aren't we? We're going to talk about common pitfalls which lead to the debrief falling foul of various little problems.
Why it might happen, kind of. Yeah, understanding maybe character traits, those kind of things, and then
how to recognise it.
And hopefully how to rescue it as well. Yeah. Although it's not always straightforward.
That's the plan.
If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a like. Equally so, if you didn't like the episode, give us a dislike, but let us know in the comments why, because we're always keen to improve. To keep up to date with all things Sim, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to check the notification bell. And SimCast is available on all popular streaming platforms.
So then, Tony, derailing the debrief. First of all, before we get into derailing the debrief, can you just talk us a little bit about why, in a quick summary, is the debrief the most critical phase of simulation? Well,
arguably, it's the most important part of the simulation event. Mm-hmm. So again, if we look at simulation, you know, you and I would both say for it to be classed as simulation, you need to have a briefing at the beginning or a pre-brief, whatever you want to call it, a simulation activity, and then a period after that activity to have a debrief. Mm-hmm. And the importance about that is it's supposed to be a learner-led reflective conversation which explores the intended learning outcomes, a period of analysis through that debrief, trying to understand what happened, and importantly then kind of taking away some key messages in terms of how we're going to grow, how we're going to move forward, what we're going to learn from this to either take into another sim or to shape our practice moving forward.
Sure. Okay, fine. And it's a period of reasonably intense vulnerability for learners, right?
I'd argue for everyone.
For everyone,
because as an instructor, you're quite vulnerable as well, because getting it right is a complex social skill.
Yeah, it should feel like there's something on the line, right? Yeah. Like it always does. If it's done well, it feels like there's something on the line.
Yeah, I always feel like at the end of the day, Sim, I always feel like a bit of not a fraud, but I'm knackered because it's really cognitively intense to facilitate that conversation. If you do it right, you're not doing a lot of talking. And I guess that's why I feel like a bit of a fraud, because I'm exhausted and I actually haven't done the legwork here. The learners have. But actually sort of behind the scenes in my head, I am having to do a lot of on-the-fly thinking to try and get it to move as smoothly as possible. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fair. It's knackering, isn't it, to do it well, because you're concentrating on so many different things and you're trying to juggle so many kind of competing agendas. You've got the learning outcomes, you've got the learner's emotional needs, you've got your own vulnerability, you've got what you're hoping to get out of the simulation. So there's a terrific weight of responsibility on everyone to make it a good learning experience.
Yeah. So I guess before we start dipping into what happens when it goes wrong, it would be good, I think, if we could establish what a good one looks like. Yeah. So when it goes well, what are the kind of key components of a debrief and how is it structured and delivered?
So first of all, for me, there's a clear transition from what we were doing in the action to the debrief. So for me, the debrief, and this starts in the briefing. You know, so
the simulation activity has ended.
The simulation activity has ended. Like this is going to be telegraphed. We're going to do some kind of activity, and after it, that activity is going to stop, and we're going to move to somewhere else, and we're going to talk about it.
So it allows people to just transition from those different stages.
Yeah, compartmentalize. I'm going from doing now to thinking and talking. So for a start, it starts with a clear transition to the debriefing space, whether that's in the same room or whether it's in a different room altogether. So the clear transition.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got options, but it needs to be a clear transition.
I think so.
We won't look at reality just yet. We'll look at what a good one looks like, because we'll come back to those pitfalls.
So that's part of, for me, making it clear that we're transitioning from one thing to another. And I think that that's part of helping to promote psychological safety, which is that for me, there's the next most important part of this, that we do what we can at this stage to ensure that psychological safety is preserved as much as possible from the start.
So it might just be, let's just everyone have a sit down, have a moment to compose yourself, and then we'll look at sort of having a structured guide through that debrief conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if it was a bit spicy, that was a bit spicy, something that acknowledges the feel in the room before launching into the debrief and gathering those initial feels and reactions from the learner group.
Okay. I think then, to try and structure the conversation, it is useful to go back to the learning outcomes, which should be clear. They should be appropriate. And the learners should have had those learning outcomes in the briefing before the simulation activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And there should be an appropriate balance between the technical and the non-technical in those outcomes. That's what we want. We want to be seeing that in the debrief, saying, look, it wasn't all about the technical stuff, it was about the non-technical stuff, if that's appropriate to the simulation.
Okay. And it helps to preview what is going to come next, which is probably the more detailed analysis of things that are going on.
Yeah, exactly. So, if necessary, reasserting the basic assumption and saying that we'll dig into some detail and we're going to analyse it, and everyone's going to take something away from today that hopefully will be useful for their future practice.
Okay. And then it is about that period of analysis. So it's about, as a debriefer, facilitating that reflective conversation and steering it through those learning outcomes.
Yes, exactly.
With an experienced debriefer having the confidence to maybe go a little bit off-piste if something in that simulation activity is worth discussing to the level which we would call an unintended learning outcome.
Absolutely.
This was significant enough that we need to discuss it, but I'm going to have to deviate a little bit to do that. And that comes with skill and experience.
It does. And the more I think about it, the more I imagine it like the learning outcomes being a kind of the center of mass, and that actually an effective debrief can kind of gravitate and orbit around the learning outcomes. And sometimes you'll get a point that's so interesting, it's got such a high velocity. This point is so important that it takes you way out of the normal orbital path. But you should, in your mind, be thinking, the further we go away, we need to slow this down and bring it back to the orbit of the learning outcomes when we can.
Okay.
And so we should be trying to return to, unless I suppose something just happens that is just so alien, to continue the metaphor, that it needs to remain the focus and the learning outcomes need to stop. So flexibility.
Okay. Normally we would return to those elements. So again, the role of the debriefer is, when appropriate, is to just bring them back to the learning outcomes and then to curate that discussion, which again should be learner-led.
Yeah.
So that we can get towards the learners identifying whether they were able to achieve those learning outcomes or not in that sim.
Yeah, absolutely. And to couch it in kind of, experiential learning theory, we want there to have been this reflective observation, then this kind of sense making or meaning making, abstract conceptualization, and then into that process of future planning and thinking of cognitive experimentation. What would you do? How does this relate to previous experience? And how can you use this in future to improve safety or care or practice? Then
the educator needs to bring things to a close, look at what we've learned from it. So that kind of growth, that learning, invite the learners again to sort of share their experiences of that. Then it's probably maybe a summary of the learning outcomes, whether you've achieved them or not, and in what way, maybe your own interpretation or reflection on that, draws it to a conclusion, and then clearly closing the debrief.
Yeah, ending and moving on.
Piece of cake, yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think? So that in an optimal world, that's how it looks. The world's not optimal; it's messy and complex. So what? How do you think we want to tackle this then? How do we want to tackle how we derail that utopian debrief that we've just described?
I think there's a number of things, isn't there? There is some individual behaviours that we bring to the table.
Yeah.
and we've covered that in a previous episode, so we'll dip into a little bit of that in more detail.
Yep.
Then there are kind of just normal character traits, dispositions, the way that you behave, the nature of the educator.
Yeah.
Then I think there are some common communication issues that, again, if you're doing it on the fly, are really easy to make and really common, and you have to sort of retrain your brain, and you still make those mistakes. And then there's, I guess, organizational issues as well.
Fine. Okay, great. Well, let's take them in order then. So dig into them. So the behaviours of the facilitator. What the one that we talked about previously on the Four Horsemen of the Debrief Apocalypse, and probably the most archetypical kind of derailer of the debrief is the tutor, isn't it?
I think it's easy to go into teaching mode because you will have observed a performance in the simulation, particularly some of the technical aspects. And if it hasn't gone exactly how you would have wanted it to, or if learners haven't achieved a criteria, or even if they have, it's easy to start critiquing that. And it's also easy to making that really common pitfall of turning the debrief into feedback rather than a debrief. And
you know, we were chatting beforehand before we started recording today about how would you recognise that was happening? You know, how do you know when a debrief has turned into a tutorial?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I think the more that you do it and the more experience, you can sometimes pick yourself up and you recognise halfway through. And then again, this is why it's exhausting, because you're on the fly thinking, oh, right, okay, I've dipped into tutorial mode. I'm now teaching and leading the session. Everyone else has gone quiet. How do I turn this around and rescue it?
I reckon one way that you can detect it as the facilitator is if you are answering your own questions, possibly with another question.
Yeah.
So I reckon that's a kind of a hallmark of it slipping into tutorial mode.
One of the things that we have both, I think, seen the value in is when we run our simulation instructor course and we run some simulations, which are very light touch, based around educational theory and principles, is we co-debrief. So we debrief with each other and we do pick each other up. So our role there is to work with learners to help them foster debrief, but we're also helping each other. So we can go, you know, you're dipping into teaching mode now.
Well, that's a great example of how you might ask a closed question.
We try and rescue it and make it look like it's doable, but of course it's not.
Yeah, we do it all the time. It's just about getting more of the good bits and fewer of the kind of feedbacky bits. You know, like we're always going to during a debrief. Yeah. It's natural.
Another archetype is the critic.
The critic, the person who just can't help but pick up all of the details in the debrief.
Was that wrong? And then was that wrong?
And then this. And I've got a big long list of bullet points that I'll need to get into this debrief.
And I guess the thing we need to think about here is that isn't the purpose of the debrief. The debrief is, again, facilitating a reflective conversation, allowing people to recognise some of their own foibles or whatever the performance has been. If you need to give that level of critique and feedback, it's probably a skill session rather than a sim session.
Yeah, that might be a point. Yeah, maybe you've gone too soon, and maybe that kind of feeds into this fourth topic around organisational structure. So let's talk about some character traits then and dispositions. We've talked a bit about some of those, and you know, if anyone wants to go and check out that Four Horsemen episode, it was in our top 10, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was one of the first ones we did. I think it's one of the ones we're still probably the proudest about.
Yeah, because it just felt real. So do have a look at that if you're interested in those archetypes.
Blow off the YouTube archives and go and have a look at it.
But it closely related, I think, to behaviours of the facilitator is the nature of the educator who's doing the facilitation.
Yeah, I think again, if you're an educator in higher education and you're just used to teaching, you're used to doing the bulk of the talking. So that first one's obvious. Is if you're doing too much talking, you're not facilitating a debrief properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Why am I talking? You know, like if you're doing the talking, it's not going well.
So why do people do all that talking? There's a couple of reasons why, isn't there?
There are. I think the first one is perhaps just a shade of insecurity that you've asked the right question in the debrief.
Yeah.
I always feel like my temptation, if I feel like I've asked a slightly ambiguous question, I'm much more likely to want to follow it up, because I'll ask a question and then I'll try and read the responses and I'll be like, do they look blank?
So are you suggesting that they can be too much of a good thing? So even what you're doing is over-analysing the fact that you might be asking the right or wrong question and then trying to correct yourself.
Maybe. Yeah. So there's certainly, have I asked a good question?
Yeah.
That is another reason for asking another question and answering your own question with a question. But I don't think it's all that. Sometimes I think it's wanting to get to the point, wanting to get to the crux of what the intended learning outcomes are. So impatiently trying to kind of continue the conversation.
This is what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
No, that's not what it's about, is it? It's about what the learners want to talk about. And I think the other really obvious one is just being comfortable with silence.
Oh God, yeah.
Asking a question, and but again, we've experienced this with people who've had a go at debriefing, maybe have had limited experience, come on the Sim Instructor course, had a go themselves, and they just kind of are trying to fill in the void. Yeah,
absolutely. Some people, and I think we all need to build up our tolerance to uncomfortable silence. Like that's something that as a more experienced educator, I've become more comfortable with it.
Yeah. Well, let's remove the word uncomfortable then.
Yeah.
Let's just build up the tolerance of silence, because it's a fundamental communication skill, isn't it? Because if you're not comfortable with silence, you then fill it. If it's in a debrief, that might be that means that you are now continuing to talking when someone has an opportunity to talk. But just in normal communication skills, you'd fill it with ers and ums and all of those things which we've become very aware of when we record.
Absolutely. I think for me, if I was to relate it back to my clinical practice and I was to be notifying somebody at the end of a out of hospital cardiac arrest that a relative of theirs had died, if I'm giving them a notification of death, the last thing I want to be saying is anything in the spaces. So I'm really, really sorry to have to tell you that, this has happened. You have to allow that person time and space to process. And it's no different in a debrief. You're asking complex social questions of people and they take processing time. You have to stop. Otherwise you derail the debrief, because what happens is you ask a question and you trigger a synapse and a person is like, oh, that's an interesting space I've never been to cognitively before. And just as the kind of the neurons are firing, and another question. You're like, sorry, that was really good.
Should I say it this way instead? Because going back to your point, maybe I'm thinking with my debriefing insecurities that I've asked the wrong question.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we start to move away from this notion of uncomfortable silence and just embrace silence, because it's not just because people don't know what to say or don't understand the question. They just need to think.
They just need time to think. They need time to formulate an answer. Because you haven't asked them, if they want a cup of tea or whether they want tea or coffee. It's like, what do you, on reflection, what was your rationale for undertaking this complex course of action over another?
You're exploring a complex idea or principle, but also at a vulnerable point, because it's often based around their competency.
Yeah. How do you think another person could have perceived what you'd said? Like, I'm asking you a question which is intensely metacognitive, and I'm going to give you less than 2 seconds to respond.
So if we rewind, and this is a little skill that you can have a go at if you're new to debriefing, what Lawrence and I both like to do in terms of starting the debrief, and this will give you a good idea of how much thinking time it takes up for people to be involved. We start off with our initial reactions and we say, in one word, summarize what that debrief activity was like for you. And that works really well because it normally evokes an emotion or a feeling that as a facilitator you can kind of lean into and explore a little bit more. But it takes a lot of thinking about just to have one word. So when you go into the analysis section and you're asking those much more complex questions, it's going to take some thinking.
Of course it is. Of course it is, yeah. So, and then I think that the character traits, the character traits that are associated with really good debriefs are people who, when they posit the basic assumption at the beginning of a simulation session, genuinely embody the principles behind it. Somebody who genuinely comes across as patient and non-judgmental and developmental and warm and maybe with an element of humor, but also quite serious educator. So anything that's not that. So anything which is flippant or irreverent or uncaring, defensive.
Yeah, judgmental.
Yeah. So
too serious.
Too serious, too jokey. It becomes a farce, and that's not what you want. So you just want like serious fun. Anything that's outside of like serious fun is maybe not ideal. So that's some of the kind of traits that can potentially derail the debrief.
What about the lapses in communication that we can all fall foul of? Because again, we are often having to construct a question or direction on the fly. What things do we need to be mindful of?
The thing is, there's so much to be mindful of here. And I think the first thing is the point that you make, that in terms of cognitive bandwidth, the facilitator is often going to be close to max.
Yeah.
Because you're listening, you're thinking, you're coordinating, you're trying to read the room.
Writing things down.
So there's just the processing element of that.
But this goes back to why silence is important, because you can just spend a little bit of time, a second or two, thinking about things, constructing a question in your head, and just spending that little bit more time about thinking, well, am I about to make one of the mistakes that commonly is potentially derailing for a debrief?
Yeah, absolutely. And then so there's that element, that there's the processing, and then I think one of the other things for me is that Dykman said simulation is a complex social endeavor. What we're asking people to do is to use language to conceptualize and to analyze an experience that happens in the social realm. And the English language, and in fact, no spoken language is entirely adequate for describing the complexity of the human experience that we all go through. Like, there are no words that can adequately describe sometimes the intensity of feeling or the nature of the experience, right? So there just are not words that are sufficiently good. So everything's an approximation. And then on top of that, you've got the fact that the communication, there's always a gap between communication as imagined and communication as done. There's always a gap between what I think I'm going to communicate to you and what
sender
I actually, the sender-receiver gap.
Yeah.
So that's another reason. And that's outside of, human control to an extent. So there's an element of the nature of communication itself is going to be challenging to the debrief.
Frame of reference, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, cultural references.
Yeah.
Like any frame of reference, exactly. Context.
And then there's the actual words, isn't there? Mm-hmm. The way that you structure a question and the things that we would probably in everyday life default to. But when you're trying to debrief with good judgment.
Yeah.
There are certain pitfalls that you can. Why was it that you did it like that?
Yeah, exactly.
So asking a why question, for example, is inherently judgmental. We were talking about this recently on a sim instructor course, and I don't know if we came to the conclusion of why particularly it's much more judgmental.
What, the why question?
Yeah.
So why? There's too many whys in that sentence. So in the instructor course, we were talking about why questions that are framed with how and what at the beginning feel less judgmental
than why. Which is, and essentially this is the same question, but just you changing the why to a what or a how.
Yeah.
What was it that?
So any linguists listening, if you know why that, if there's a good reason for that, please drop us a comment and let us know why, because we couldn't puzzle it out, but we just know it feels the way.
Psychology, isn't it?
For some reason. And it's so even the simple words that we choose, even the accidental habits that we have.
And this is the thing, like you can talk about the basic assumption at the beginning. You can do everything right, and then you just go, why did you do it like that?
Yeah. Or you just, you're so just jammed at, like, radar jammed with all of the things that you're trying to think about, and they're running out of time, and it's the end of the day, and this, got to be done by so and so, and you've got an appointment to get to after work.
So
then you just drop into, you made a bit of a pig's ear of that.
Yeah. Why did you do that?
What I meant to say was,
and so definitely why questions we want to try and avoid if possible, or we could possibly reframe them. Closed questions, pretty simple. If it's a yes or no, it's not going to lead to a reflective conversation, isn't it? No. Particularly if you've got a learner who might be less willing to contribute. They could answer it in a different way, but they could just go, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is and as we say in the instructor course, the thing about asking a closed question is it can be quite useful. So you can use a closed question as a hook to pull a more reluctant learner into the conversation. So, do you like asking closed questions, Tony? Yes or no? Oh, why? Do you like asking, why would you prefer asking open questions?
So that's kind of an auto recovery.
Yeah.
Get out of jail free card.
Yeah. If you ask a closed question, ask a how or why or what question afterwards.
Yeah.
Fine. And I think I think those are probably the main ones off the top of my head that we can talk about in terms of the communication challenges.
Then obviously in healthcare, we are in situations where we might have to unpack something a little bit critical or spicy. And this is where debriefing with good judgment and advocacy with inquiry comes in. Yeah. So, a complication has arisen in the simulation. It hasn't gone to plan, and as a debriefer, you need to try and unpack that, because if you don't have that conversation, it may well mean a patient safety risk. In reality. And a common mistake is the guess what I'm thinking question. Yes. I know what you did wrong. What I'm going to try and do is coax it out of you, but in doing so, because you probably didn't know, or there was a reason why it went wrong, or you're going to just second guess everything. And so in doing so, you just again erode that psychological safety and make that individual feel this big.
If I can just share an example of this from my practice, when so many moons ago, I did a master's in medical and healthcare simulation at the University of Hertfordshire, and the lead for that course is Ken Spearpoint, who is just an absolute legend of simulation training in the UK. And there was an amazing moment when we were running our own simulations when one of the students did something which is just sort of profoundly wrong. And we were watching remotely, and I was watching Ken, and he was like, he just sort of turned to us group that were watching remotely, and he said, we're going to have to unpack this in the debrief. And like that's a skilled educator's response, isn't it? Yeah. And and it was hard, because in that moment there is so much vulnerability on the line. We were all, most people on that course were veteran clinicians and veteran educators. And this person was a surgeon, a consultant surgeon who was proposing doing something which was,
fundamentally wrong,
culturally inappropriate.
Oh, okay, fine.
And it was hard because it's very difficult to have that conversation with good judgment in a way that does not erode that person's sense of psychological safety or vulnerability.
Yeah.
But he did. And it was and we took a break afterwards, and that's the other thing.
So I guess for those who are new to advocacy with inquiry, the basic premise is you make an observation of fact to start with. So what you observe, what the error was that happened in the sim. You then advocate your position on it, trying to avoid judgment, and then what you do is invite the learner to explore through reflective conversation their interpretation of it. And it just helps to highlight if they weren't aware of that error. And let's be honest, in the simulation activity, they probably weren't aware, and that's why that happened. And that's exactly what he did. That's exactly what Ken did. He used advocacy with inquiry, and we got to a point where it was like, are we as a group, are we aware that this is problematic? And the person was just like,
no. And it was like this kind of watershed moment of like, oh, right, you didn't know that. Okay, fine. Fine, we've all learned something today. That's great. Let's move on. And, but yeah, it's that's why we have to get the psychological safety right. That's why we have to, it's in moments like that where the true power and the true vulnerability of learners and educators in simulation debrief can come out.
So I'm going to ask you a question here, and we may well disagree. And our people listening and watching may disagree as well. So let's say you've got a group of 6 to 8 learners. Do you have to actively get all of those learners involved in the debrief conversation? Or in doing so, are you going to forcefully try and involve someone, and in doing so, maybe erode psychological safety?
Because you never know what people are carrying in.
Because we can use techniques to get people involved. Yeah. So we will often, with small groups like that, go at the beginning with those big feelings and those initial thoughts and feelings, go around the room. Yeah. And that just means it's their initial gambit in, and it's low risk compared to then saying something for the first time in the thick of a deep analysis. But it doesn't always work, does it?
Yeah. I think I will always feel a bit, in a small group like that, I will always feel like I've not fully succeeded as an educator if everybody doesn't say something. Equally, I won't push too hard, because I think we have to accept the fact that some people as learners are more generative and some learners are more vicarious. Yeah. Some people need to be involved in the discussion and some people need to listen to the discussion.
And it will come, I think, the more experienced you are, the more you'll be able to get a feeling of the room and judge that. Again, I'm thinking of a recent simulation instructor course that we did where we went around the room and initially did some feelings and reactions, and one individual had very different initial reaction and feeling from others, but then through the rest of the analysis they contributed practically nothing. And I was aware of that, but I was kind of coaching someone to do the debrief, and I just said to them, just go back to that individual and just let's explore that reaction and feeling, because it was different. Yeah. And it got that individual to open up. Yeah. And it was just interesting.
It was very interesting. And it was again, and it came down to a cultural difference.
Yeah.
Between from one side of the Atlantic to the other.
Indeed, quite literally.
So that was fascinating.
Should we move on?
Yes.
So the last area that we were thinking in terms of where people can get it wrong is around planning, organisation, structure of the debrief. And I think the most obvious thing is if you don't have a plan or structure and you're just kind of flying off the cuff, it could go wrong.
Yeah, when it feels a bit rabid, it can erode psychological safety.
However, if you're an expert debriefer, you're going to need less and less structure to feel more confident to deliver that. But you will still deliver a structured debrief, but you just perhaps won't use the tool, for example.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
there's loads, isn't there? There's loads of tools that kind of bring some sort of formulaic structure-like process to the process of debriefing. And we have formulated a RAG model. So review, analysis, grow, but most models have some sort of similar features. GAS, for example, gather, pearls, analyze, summarize, pearls, diamond. They all do a sort of similar thing, really.
And they're designed to help a novice or intermediate debriefer structure the debrief. So again, it follows a set format rather than it just being a free-for-all and a conversation, an opportunity to either, just pull your own performance apart, which is what a lot of individuals do.
Yeah, or a pile-on.
Yeah.
Positive or negative, to be honest. Not that a pile-on normally has a positive connotation, but, quite often it will just descend into feedback at that stage, it's unhelpful. And I think probably in terms of planning and organisation, for me, especially as somebody who's taught on quite a number of Resus Council Advanced Life Support courses, timekeeping. So I'm always, when I'm doing sim in a university, I'm always finished early because I'm just like, right, done. But actually and that's probably a toxic trait of mine, is that I would rather be done early than sort of use all the time.
Trait, is it? I always think you're the hero when you allow people to finish early. It's a little secret freebie for me.
Well, I kind of, but what's toxic about it is I'm not thinking, well, why isn't everyone else finished?
Okay, fine.
Because I want to go. Like, I want to, where's the next one? I'm behind now.
But again, I have a very low threshold for running another sim if I see the benefit of extending a debrief. So I will invest my time in that debrief. But I know that doesn't always happen, and you do have a time constraint.
But partly the reason that losing time discipline derails the debrief is that it feels like the most appropriate thing to cut when you're up against it is the debrief. So the reason it derails the debrief is because it truncates it.
It's so counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah, because you think, well, we still need to run the action phase because, you know, we still need to do the do of what it is that we're trying to simulate. And then actually you're like, right, okay, anyone, okay, fine, moving on. Fine, good, let's do the next one. And you just wasted all that experience.
And going full circle right back to the beginning of what we talked about is having that clear transition to an end of the debrief as well, where it just kind of peters out, or we don't have that element of review and learning from it. Or another classic example is, okay, we're going to end the debrief there. Anyone got any questions? And then you just reopen it again.
Yeah.
So it's little things like that, isn't it? Which is, you know, to do with organisation.
Yeah. So the take home. And so, okay, so talking of take homes then, what do you think are your take-home messages in terms of the avoiding the derailment of the debrief?
Well, I think the first thing is practice makes perfect. So the more debriefing that you can get under the belt, the more that you can develop those complex communication, socio skills that you need to make a debrief flourish. You'll develop more confidence. So you'll be more confident to embrace those silences.
Perfect. Because the thing I was going to say, I think, is embrace silence.
Yeah.
I think is probably for me, because it tackles so many of the debriefing archetypes that we've talked about before. You know, it cancels out the tutor, it cancels out the critic, it cancels out the groupie, it cancels out the hero. It prevents you from over talking if you just ask a question and then just button it.
I think as well, when you're new to debriefing, you know, and you're quite worried about it, obsessing on the words and overcomplicating things can be a common pitfall. So just try and keep it simple.
And I think in terms of kind of character and nature, just try and be genuinely open and humble.
Yeah.
Because the learners will feed off of that.
Yeah.
And want to engage more.
And some of that humility is if you do put your foot in it, if you do ask a leading question or a why, or you're a little bit judgmental, if you can and you're aware, correct yourself. So using the example you did, oh, sorry, that was a closed question. Let me reframe that. Or following on from what was it about that that made you feel that way?
And I think in terms of time, just try where you can to keep to time, to try and stay on track in terms of what you're doing. But if you are starting to feel like you're getting a bit pushed for time, try not to scrimp on the debrief.
Yeah. And again, being able, so again, with the time thing, if you take a step back, if you don't talk and let the others talk, you've got more bandwidth to go, okay, we need to pull this out, you know, this to a close and conclusion now. I always think, you know, thank everyone for the contributions. Really interesting discussion. And actually in your head, you're thinking, we went way off on tangent. I need to pull you back in then. Some really good discussion. I just want to draw you back to the learning outcomes and maybe talk about this topic, or let's just start to recap things so that we can look at moving forward.
Nice. Okay. Great. So thank you very much for that, Tony. That's been interesting. Talk about derailing the debrief. That's been a good one. Yeah. So if anyone watching, if you've got any kind of interesting stories or things you think that we've missed that contribute to derailing the debrief, we'd love to hear from you. So stick us a comment below. It's just about practice. Yeah, practice, it's a complex social endeavor, and you know, I don't think anyone would profess to be expert necessarily in any. You know, it's just a form of communication. Like you're constantly evolving and developing it, and you know, derailment probably makes it sound a bit kind of final, doesn't it? If a train derails, it's kind of going to get scrapped. Actually, if an educational event derails, you just kind of have to be kind to yourself and just try and do it a little bit differently next time.
Well, I want just one last closing comment, and I have found it hugely beneficial, is if you can, and it is a luxury, debrief with someone else, because like you said, you'll pick up all of these different things. You'll pick each other up if you make the mistakes, but also you'll be like, I really like that.
Yeah, you'll learn stuff all the time. Yeah. Great. Well, we hope you've learned stuff listening to today's episode, and we look forward to speaking to you again on the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.